welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch and you managed to get some food in you. So the next session we're going to be looking at today is around the integration of transport. That's our second theme. And I think this is one of the big fundamental things that transport technology can deliver. And I'm really pleased to be chairing the first bit of this section, where we have a fireside chat talking about what that vision is for an integrated transport network. We've seen it become sort of more of a topic for government and industry, and we've seen things like the development of mobility as a service, the Future Transport Zones funding, which received 92 million a couple of years ago to fund certain areas around the UK, to look at how you better integrate transport. And we're also seeing some large client bodies like National Highways, like Network Rail, consider more about how they link up and create that seamless journey for ultimately the end user. So today I've got, we're having a fireside chat with two of my colleagues, John Chapman, Regional Transport Lead at Amazon Web Services, and Mark Collins, Head of Future Transport at Transport for the West Midlands. So I'm going to head over and we're going to have, you have to imagine the fire. Health and safety means that we can't have an actual one, but you'll have to imagine the fire, and we'll have a quick chat about what an integrated transport service means. So I suppose the first question for both of you, and maybe by answering this you can also explain about what your role is within this, but what do you mean when we what do you think we mean when we say integrated transport, and how would you define that term? So Mark, if I come to you first.
Yes, I suppose it's one of the words like communication, which can be a mastery of all sins, couldn't it? So my role within Transport for West Midlands is around looking at future technologies, so around also looking at future products and what actually customers use. And we've also introduced as part of that a level of understanding sort of behaviour. So how do you apply behavioural science into sort of the transport sector? So I suppose the way that we look at integration is maybe from two perspectives. One, from this customer angle, and I think what we see integration having value is we want to be able to provide sort of seamless, frictionless journeys. That's what integration means to consumers. And then from an internal perspective, really what we're looking at is a way to understand the network and look how actually all those pieces of the puzzle sit together in a way that we can curate a space and curate a network that actually works better for both the area that we're in and also for the people. So integration is a mechanism by which we can hopefully seek to bring harmony in many regards.
Bringing harmony, I quite like that term. John, if we can come to you, what do you see as kind of an integrated transport network for you, and what do you see as AWS's role in it as well?
Yes, so I mean, there's probably a couple of angles to that. There's obviously a technology angle to integration. As AWS, a technology supplier, that's something we have a lot of experience in, and we see integration of different kind of systems. The enablement behind MAS as a thing is really done by data integration, a seamless user experience from a technology perspective, so that you're able to kind of integrate the experience both from a physical infrastructure point of view, but also the technology side of things. That's kind of one angle to it. But from AWS, Amazon, so I look after the regional transport authorities for AWS, who are using AWS technology to achieve those kinds of integrations, and MAS technology, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But also from an Amazon perspective, what we're trying to do is link up that approach of Amazon Logistics, Amazon Delivery in the UK as well, who are hugely vested in the idea of a more integrated transport system when we talk about multimodal ways of doing delivery, and multimodal systems that need to be in place from an infrastructure perspective for Amazon as an organization to then go out and work as part of a more integrated transport network that includes both public and private sector. So there's two angles to it from an Amazon and AWS point of view, I suppose.
Interesting. Well, that leads on quite nicely about what sort of the technology that is needed to create that integrated transport, because ultimately it doesn't happen by itself. And you mentioned things like MAS, smart ticketing being another one, kind of an open approach to data. I'm wondering whether what do you see as the kind of technology that needs to be in place to get us from where we currently are to kind of a more integrated system?
I'm happy to go first.
You go first, yeah.
I mean, I'll try not to say data too often because I appreciate that it will be the common theme through every technology provider. It's the conversation that's been had in public sector and transport for 5+ years. We need to get our data sorted and understand the data. There's all types of different data around user behaviors, and then the physical, well, technical integration of data between systems. It's about understanding what you can do with that joined up data view from an integration. So technology, again, will always come back to what data systems do we have in place to better understand what people, how they want to travel. And the rest, it's not really a technology question, as I'm sure Mark will probably come onto. It's about how you remove the barriers for people to actually go and use the systems. So technology, specifically in transport, is a facilitator of the outcome that you're trying to achieve. Teaching you to suck eggs, I know, Max, but an integrated transport system is the goal, and the technology kind of fits in where it needs to behind that. So MAS, for an example, is a mobile phone application. You could call it that, but actually there's a whole load of data in the background that's got an integration system that's happened, whether there's some AI predictive demand responsive element in there as well. There's all sorts of technologies that facilitate those types of outcomes, but really the question is not, is the tech ready? It's how do you remove the barriers for the actual users?
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think for me, if you consider that customer angle, it's how can you get the right information to the right customer at the right time that they can then use that to then make a better decision. You know, that's really the trick of all this, is whether that's the application of AI, whether that's, you know, putting data together in a way that actually creates a mechanism that means you can be more predictive. Getting the right information at the right time is the key component. And I think it's really interesting if we look across the sort of the transport sector. Most times currently we are asking the user to do something for us, you know, adapt to our system, understand the different ticket types, understand the different way we charge them. And actually the sort of the value of technology that comes is really how can those systems adapt to the user rather than us, the user having to adapt to the systems. And I think that sort of paradigm shift is a lot of what's being talked about at the minute. And that's really where the value in integration comes, I think.
Well, and if I can just stick with you, Mark, you're obviously West Midlands is part of one of the future transport zones.
Yeah.
And there's, I believe, 4 of them all around the UK.
Yeah.
And you're also part of a regulatory sandbox. So could you just tell us a bit more about what that means, what those 2 different elements are doing, and kind of what it means for transport as well?
Yeah, so the Future Transport Zone for us was really sort of labelled around empowering and enabling people to make better decisions. So part of that was increasing the amount of choice we could have, so that was about modality and a modal choice. Part of that was understanding behaviours, so things like mobility credits were introduced to say what happens when. Part of that is also around sort of data use and how we use data. And also part of that is around how we manage our network, so around traffic regulation orders, etc. So there's a sort of lot in there that's a bit of a mixed bag to understand what input actually got what output, and MAS was also part of that. And where the regulatory sandbox is taking that and moving forward really is understanding what bits of legislation are being left behind that stop us from moving forward. So there's a few things that we're looking at in terms of demand responsive transport, and I think you alluded to it earlier around we've got some pretty antiquated rules that if a vehicle has 8 seats, it has one sort of tax regulation. If it has 9 seats, it has something different. That was born out of the way that we run public services. A DRT breaks the mold around that. So how can you actually have something that's more fit for purpose that allows you to get more efficiency into those types of services? And then we've got ones around micromobility, still no bill. And e-scooters, for example, is the start of a very long road for micromobility. So how can we understand what needs to happen next in a framework that actually can inform the legislation and make it move quicker? So that's what the regulatory sandbox is there to do, is to try and explore the art of the possible to inform legislation so it can catch up much quicker.
That's really interesting. John, if you mentioned data and not talking about it too much, but it is fundamentally the big factor here. It is the enabler. You're obviously working across different modes. I mean, I remember when we talked to you saying West Midlands Police and ANPR data usage. How do you kind of bring that all together and kind of, can you give us also some examples of kind of the things you're doing on the ground in terms of utilising that data?
Yeah, absolutely. And Transport for West Midlands is a great and shining example for all sorts of things, as I'm sure we're all aware. but data use in particular is one of the things that they're really kind of at the forefront of. So for those who don't know, Transport for the West Midlands have an agreement with West Midlands Police to share ANPR data. That's 6.5, 7 million records of ANPR data a day that comes through from West Midlands Police and lands into a data environment that Transport for West Midlands have built on AWS. That's great. It's a big data platform, but again, what's interesting and how that has all come about is because Stuart Lester, who's a colleague of Mark's, has really understood what they're trying to do for their users in having that data in the first place. So that data is doing a whole load of things around, it's the baseline for all their reporting to the DFT for DTAG. So everything that comes through, they have 7 million records live a day that they can go back and say, you know, if we want to put a new traffic light system in here, the baselining for our DTAG is incredibly strong. We can provide really good information to DFT. And actually, that's what's enabled him to kind of go and get that funding and operationalize a data model that delivers something in an existing system. So when you talk about using data in different ways, you don't want to break the things that you already have. What West Midlands have done is something incredibly innovative in having a completely cloud-first data model, but they're using it to back up the traditional DFT reporting, enhance that DFT reporting, and actually, importantly, using that data to go and win more funding for things like future transport zones. So how do we know if we need a future transport zone? How do we know the West Midlands is going to be an innovative place that understands their users? Well, it's actually by starting that data journey. So West Midlands are a great example of having a data-first approach, and everything that they do is baselined by data. So that's one example of it. We do very similar work with Transport for London in their SITS program, so the Surface Intelligent Transport System program that's being delivered at the moment through various partners. TfL's goal for that is to have 5-minute predictions on the network so that they can stop incidents 5 minutes before they happen. Again, that is really just a data platform. It's a digital twin. It's a 24/7 live digital twin that delivers numerous benefits for net zero, reducing or increasing safety on their network, improving emissions, monitoring, all these kinds of things. That is just a data platform, but the point is they understand what data they have and how they can use it to kind of go and enhance those actual things that they're trying to achieve on the network, which is improving safety. So there's a couple of examples of that. And again, Manchester are doing some great work around moving data around for the B network, making sure people are in the right place at the right time, providing that data integration. You've got really old school data formats for bus timetabling, which I'm sure doesn't surprise anyone. How do I get that from one part of Manchester to another when I'm putting on a new bus service? All those kind of practical applications are the most important part. Again, it's not about whether the tech is ready, it's about whether you understand what you're trying to achieve.
That's really interesting. I'm keen to open this up for questions and thoughts from the audience, and we should have some roving mics somewhere. So does anyone have any questions for our two speakers? Or maybe I'll give you a bit of time to have a think. I have a question on for both of you, really, which is how actually we bring this all together. So, I mean, Mark, you mentioned mobility credits, DRT. I know there's work on CAV as well, and also on MAS and mobility hubs. How do you bring that all together? Because it's a lot of different things going on, which ultimately you want to provide one kind of cohesive picture for the public.
Yeah, so I mean, this is sort of the value of mechanisms such as mobility as a service. So you can seek to sort of consolidate all those services in one house. I think what that does, and the issues we've had with that are it brings with it the histrionics and the silos that existed previously to the forefront, whereby you've got very, very different ticketing options, you've got very different types of services, and how do you push those together to give a coherency that customers can make sense of? And part of this clearly is a behaviour change programme and an education piece around the public sector, not only inwardly but equally outwardly in terms of how we communicate with our customers, etc. Part of this is also data. Part of this is also making sure we've got the right services in the right places. And I think that is also something which historically we have built timetables that suit the bus company and the train company, because that's how they can consolidate and staff. But are they truly actually reflecting the customer requirement? And I think that's the sort of question that we're asking ourselves about how we put in the user front and center with this, because a lot of these technologies are fantastic, but we need to make sure that they're actually there fitting a purpose and not a solution, trying to find a problem, so to speak.
If I could maybe tag onto that, I think one of the great things about cloud technology is as a fundamental enabler. Again, we don't talk about what type of tech we want to put in somewhere, it's about the outcome. But we're in this place in transport where things like MaaS, mobility as a service, demand responsive transport, those are terms that are born of cloud technology, right? As a service is a cloud term, using what you need, when you need, being able to go and access a resource for as long as you need it and then turn it down. Those kind of fundamentals of cloud technology and the innovation that it allows you to have kind of align exactly with the things that are trying to be done in transport, which is why we think there's such a great opportunity there to kind of drive those outcomes.
Yeah. Questions? Any questions? We've got time for a few. So gentleman over here, and any others? No, we'll go for gentleman over here.
Right, Peter Richards, National Highways. Many years ago, I went to Holland, and they have an amazing multimodal transport system of you take your bicycle to the bus stop, you lock it up there, you take the bus. All the buses go in the bus station at the same time, you nip over from one bus to the next, it goes off to the railway station, and then you get your train without any waiting. It's all coherent. In Germany, they have a very simple ticketing system for the tram. You get a ticket, it's valid for 2 hours, or many trams you want to use. Here, we're faffing about with timetables, this, that, the other. What lessons have we learned from Europe?
That's a good question. Lessons from Europe. Given we've got time for maybe one more, so I'll go to the lady over here, and we'll take them together.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is more about how you integrate the back office systems. I'm not talking about a UK single back office. I'm talking about being able to travel from a bus to a train to a bus, not just in a regional area, but outside of that. Do you think it's possible to have not a ticketing back office, but a hot list back office? So if you're using a rail barcode on a bus, the bus ETM can go to that and say, yes, this is a valid ticket, and it's not secure. Do you think we're anywhere near to being able to achieve that with the data and the systems we have now? Then they're not in place currently.
Okay, great. So two really good questions. One, learning from Europe. Two, how we use back office systems and how you can integrate it. So feel free to deal with both or one. Mark, shall I come to you first?
Yeah, I suppose there's not necessarily one answer on this. I think that it's a combination of a sort of deregulated market for one, and the histrionics that have gone on with that. I think there is clearly a piece around political ambition with this as well. I think the Holland study is very interesting about, if you look at their strategy, they've had a very long-term strategy. I think in the UK we have an endemic problem with short-termism in terms of our strategy with transport thinking. So that is a factor. I think a lot of effort has also gone into around culture as well in some of those countries, whereby actually the mentality of those people has been sort of manifested over many years and many generations. Again, that sort of long-termism. And I think to the point then about trying to do the integration, you're left in a space where actually you've created silos because you've got that sort of lack of coherency in terms of sort of the policy and the way that the market has developed. And therefore, it's very difficult to get a ticket that sort of suits all those ambitions. And we're going through that in a minute with mobility as a service. And we find it really difficult because actually the commercial agreements and the commercial businesses have built around having a silo mentality. So we've got to break down that wall as well as then actually get to the point where you're actually giving the customer something that's really transferable. So not really an answer, but we sort of understand the situation we're in. The regions have got levels of ambition. How much of that we can do with going, right, we need to be wholly customer first and forcing that mandate is where we're at, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Mark comment on the political side of that rather than me, but I think it is largely a political question in that it's really about the collaboration of organisations and desire capability to do that rather than the technology being available. As we said before, we've seen some incredible collaboration approaches across Europe as Amazon and AWS. So in Paris, for example, where public transport is run by RATP, who are a slightly more commercially focused organisation, We do 2/3 of our deliveries completely zero carbon as Amazon in Paris because we're able to use the infrastructure that RATP own to come in and run deliveries from walking and cycling in the center of Paris for a day. That's about an integrated transport system that understands the needs of private and public sector, where everyone benefits from a kind of decarbonisation angle to it. That's a different type of collaboration that we have had over there. It's much harder to do here because of the way that the political organisations who are responsible for policy are done. There's still conversations that we want to have and are having, but examples of learnings from Europe is it comes back to openness and collaboration of the organisation's willingness to go and try and solve the problems together.
That's really great. That's been really fascinating. I want to finish off just with one line of kind of half a minute, even less, of just kind of what you would want to see from integrated transport if we were here in 5 years' time. So if I maybe could come to you, Mark, first. I did give you a bit of prep for this to give you a chance to have a think, but what would you like to see? 5 years' time, we're sat here.
I suppose for me, the hypothesis of integrated transport means that you get those seamless journeys, you get those friction-free journeys. And for users, that means that they seek to choose going and using public transport because they trust it. And I think for me, that is the measure by which I think we should be looking at.
And John?
Well, I would obviously agree with that. I think from our point of view, we would like to have a joined-up view on what that needs to look like. I think there's still not an understanding of what users really need to make what Mark's talked about possible. And I think in 5 years' time, if we're in a place where we actually understand what a user needs to make that possible, then we'll be in a great place. And that kind of comes back to deciding what that outcome needs to be. So that would be our view.
Brilliant. Can we give our two speakers a round of applause, please? That was fascinating. So now we're going to have a bit of a change around, and I'm going to pass over to Mark, who's going to chair a panel on MaaS. So I'll pass over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Max. As if you're not fed up with me already, this is the third time on this stage, so I apologise in advance for anyone that's tired of my dulcet tones. So this session really is going to be, as I say, talking about mobility as a service. And I'm joined today, if I can invite people up on stage, and we've had a bit of a change around in people and agenda, etc. on this one, so I'm hoping we've got everybody. So Alistair, Martin, Tim, and Dallas, if that's okay. And I have to say a special thank you also to Tim and Dallas, who have sort of joined at the 11th hour and 59 minutes with dropouts, etc. So are we missing one more as well? Ah, there we go. Okay, so I suppose the purpose of this session really is a few things. We wanted to look at what MaaS means and what that means in terms of sort of UK position as well. It's something that the Future Transport Zones especially have been looking at, but clearly not in isolation with the rest of the UK. And we can also learn a lot from around the world as well. So we're going to have hopefully some interesting discussion with some questions that come out at the end of this from the audience too. So I'm just going to move across in inspiration from Max, and I'll go over here. Thank you. I came prepared with some questions to start off with, if I can just get those out. He says, okay, so I suppose the first question, and really for those that are not necessarily too familiar with either the concept of MaaS or what MaaS can do, first question I had was, what do panelists see as the inherent value of MaaS to users and also the region as a whole, or regions, UK as well? So I'll start with yourself.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Martin Howell from Worldline. I think the inherent value must be a viable alternative to single occupancy car use, first and foremost, with all the environmental gains that come from that. It must be a way of making public transport more attractive by integrating it with other modes of transport, and in particular by integrating rail and bus more effectively. I think done properly on a national basis, mobility as a service is the easiest way to achieve levelling up. It's got to be. And it's not about injecting money here and there, it's about having a coherent, holistic whole for our transport networks. And that integration has to be underpinned by transport systems working together. And, you know, the problem is when you go at this stage in the afternoon, throughout the morning, people have said everything you want to say. And that's going to be true for all of us, I think. Siloed data, that is where one of our major problems comes. Lack of will, lack of political will, lack of vision, all of those things will be contributors to this. Those are the things we've got to change. We'll come back to that. But I think one of the things that I read recently, and this is the last point I'll make, one of the things I read recently was, I think it was the Resolution Foundation did research that suggested if everybody in the cities outside of London had access to the same level and connectivity of transport as London does, you would instantly lift 1.4 million people out of poverty. Why don't we do that? Surely that's a no-brainer. And mobility as a service, MaaS, is absolutely fundamental to how we achieve that.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Hi, I'm Dallas. I work for Snapper, so we're a New Zealand-based business with a growing UK team. And we're really in the business of making transport intelligence super easy. So from our perspective, what we're doing is we're trying to work with authorities and operators to understand what's happening in their bus network, how they can make their networks more efficient, more effective, and get more people onto buses. And so where that fits into MaaS is we're trying to make all that data more cohesive, more coherent, and really improve that passenger experience, because where you've got people that are, using those journey planner apps, it doesn't matter how fantastic that journey plan is, if the bus isn't there when they're trying to get onto it, what were they doing in the first place? So, I think what we're all trying to achieve is, like you say, like has been said many times today already, trying to get more vehicles off the road. I personally grew up in New Zealand, way in the suburbs of Auckland, very few buses that I could get from A to B, and then spent the last sort of 10-ish years as a central city dweller where I haven't had a car. I've been relying on public transport. And so as someone who uses these systems consistently, having an experience that you can just pick up and run anywhere in the country is coherent and consistent, I think that's how we get people onto public transport, because every single time we try to go somewhere new, we're trying to figure out a new system. I'm constantly at airports Googling, how do I catch the bus in this place? Like it's a crazy problem that I think if we can work around these consistent systems, we can really improve that experience for people that live in our cities, that visit our cities, that are trying to get to our cities, that just want to get around in the suburbs. I think we can really make a good experience, and get people out of cars would be amazing.
Thank you. Alistair.
Yeah, afternoon everybody. My name's Ali McInroy. I'm the Chief Exec at Technology Scotland. Among other things, we operate the MaaS Scotland network north of the border. I mean, I agree with everything that's just been said, as you said before, unsurprisingly, in many ways. MaaS is one of the many tools in the toolkit that have to be adopted to drive this behavioural change in the modal shift that I think we all agree we need to achieve. The various objectives around decarbonisation, inclusive growth, public health, all that kind of good thing. But for me, as well as that, I think it serves, for me, a public demand, or an increasing public demand to access the services that they use in day-to-day life via digital means. And people rightly, I think, now expect that they can live their life and carry out their day-to-day activities through some kind of digital platform, a mobile phone. Usually we see it a lot. We see it happening in education. We're seeing it happening in health. It's certainly been around for a long time in a lot of the kind of consumer and leisure world. And transport can't be any different. We have a headline kind of ambition in Scotland, or Scottish Government has a headline ambition, I should say, to reduce the number of car kilometres in Scotland by 20% by the end of this decade. That's going to take a massive change in behaviour to achieve that. And if we get any hope in hell of achieving it, then we have to give people the tools to allow them to do that. And yes, okay, it's a layer that sits above all the services, and I'm sure we will talk about integration of all those types of things as well. But you have to give them that access point. You have to make it easy for them. You have to engage in a language that they understand, particularly the younger generation coming through that are going to really drive that modal shift. And that, for me, is where MaaS can really move things forward over the next 10 or 15 years.
Brilliant, thank you. And Tim?
Thanks, and thank you for the invite today. So my name is Tim. I'm working in the public policy team for Tier Mobility. So we're one of the largest e-scooter and e-bike and pedal bike as well, I should say, operators. Have about 10,000 vehicles in the UK. Going last, it's a struggle to find something different to say than already been said, because it's all really obvious. But I think for us, we do our best to provide an easy-to-use, highly accessible app for our own services. But every trip is a part of a chain almost all the time, be it just walking or it's a combination of different modes. And so providing a service which links all those together, and we know we live as part of this ecosystem, and as an organisation, as a private company, we need to be helping to develop that wider supply chain and be a part of it. So in Europe, we're part of some very large, very successful MaaS systems that bring a significant part of our revenue. So yes, we have our own app, but actually, I think the long-term direction of the company is to be part of a wider system and not just an individual supplier.
It's interesting. I suppose one of my personal reflections, having sort of lived through MaaS for the past sort of a few years, is some of the attitudes of the providers to MaaS is they see it as a threat. It's interesting how, in my experience, some of the micromobility providers who are more infant in this market actually have a more progressive attitude towards MaaS. So maybe I'll come back to yourself, Tim, in terms of the challenges of MaaS, because I think this is, we expressed around some of the siloed data, consistency of systems, consistency of ticketing. What do you really see as the sort of the threats or the challenges to making MaaS sort of successful in the wider sort of domain?
I jotted down quite a long list actually on the train here today, but
we get to go first this time, really so there we go. Yeah.
I think so. We're all working in a very fast-moving digital world at the moment. So particularly on our side, for example, the developments that go on within the app are pretty extensive and continuous in trying to bring a safer, more accessible, more secure service, if you like. And so there's just a physical complexity in including that. In a deep linked environment, so where you've got a different branded MaaS service. So, riders don't see Tier anywhere in part of the process, even though they're accessing one of our vehicles. So, there's a physical replication issue of replicating particularly legislative requirements within a MaaS service, for example. So, and just the speed of keeping that going, because we're always trying to, we're always releasing stuff every few weeks. There's something new in our app, probably. So I could go on about, commercial, legal challenges and all those things as well, but that's one of the biggest.
And I suppose from a business position, you still see the opportunity greater than the threat to some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I see it from a point of being a public transport operator that can extend, they see the benefits of extending their service to the wider, completing an end-to-end journey. We see it as an access to more markets for people who are public transport users who also need to use it. We get the frustration from our own riders in some of our cities that say, what you do is great, but actually I've just gone to a rail station and then I need to do something different. So I think we are a part of a bigger world, and we need to embrace that.
I suppose, Alistair, you might have a slightly different reflection on the challenges, considering it's almost the other side of the fence. What would you say in terms of challenges for MaaS?
First of all, I'm just going to touch on, you made a good point around the operators, which I think is an important one, and we have to accept that MaaS is still in its infancy. We're seeing more and more implementations, which is great, but we do need to build a kind of evidence base as to how these implementations are actually delivered, what kind of impact they actually have. And I was reminded of a conversation I had with a MaaS technology platform provider who many years ago went to speak to the local bus operator in their area, armed with only a PowerPoint presentation, and was met, unsurprisingly, with the kind of shrug of the shoulders and, well, all right, maybe. But then he went back to see them after they'd done a fairly short-lived MaaS pilot in the area and was able to show them data around the number of people who'd been using their services related to that. Right, suddenly this is a bit more interesting. So we have to build that evidence base, and until we have that, it's going to be quite difficult to build the business case. But for me, we can talk about a lot of these other things. I'm sure we will get into things around, we're going to talk about data, I'm sure, governance models, commercial agreements, the business models themselves, all of these things. But for me, the major challenge, and a lot of these cascade down from that, is an overall lack of leadership in this space. We see it particularly north of the border, where there is no clarity at the moment coming through from the Scottish Government and from Transport Scotland as to where they see the role of mass in delivering their future transport strategy and the policy provisions round about that. And until we have clarity on that and a degree of at least a longer term commitment to the direction towards mass, I mean, mass is it's got a complicated term in itself, but towards that, then how can we expect the various stakeholders, the various private sector organisations, investors, to show an interest in this if they're not seeing that cascading down from our transport authorities? Now, that leadership, I'm not going to dictate where that leadership should necessarily come from. I've got my own views of where that should be in Scotland. It will be different in other parts of the UK and other parts of the world. But I think that is a key thing. And until we get that, it's going to be very difficult for all the other enablers and various sort of joints of mass underneath that to function.
It's really interesting. I suppose related to that, one of our own other observations is who is the arbitrator within mass? Because different consumers require different things, different services at different times, and actually we are market making. And one of the interesting and early reflections that we had was who is the conscience that sits behind that? And I still don't think that's necessarily resolved, but we feel as a transport body, we've probably got the least biased view on that. And it's interesting how that's largely the approach that's been taken, but there are clearly some commercial entities like Uber, etc., who are building their own mass systems, and they have a very different perspective, and they've got a commercial outlook. So just from yourselves and Dallas and Martin, any other reflections on challenge that we've not touched upon?
I think a lot of it's kind of already been covered. That governance and leadership is, yeah, like you say, a huge challenge, and I think it's interesting hearing you talk about it from a broader government point of view, and then also from that authority point of view, because you could make arguments sort of either way for who really should be leading the charge on that front. Yeah, I think there are huge challenges around like data standardization and just joining everything up. And one of the things you mentioned about that sort of market making, actually who is asking for it and how are they asking for it to be implemented? Is it just people that are regular public transport users who want it to sort of look a certain way, be that little bit easier? Is it people that don't use it at all and who, you know, need it to look a certain way for it to be engaging for them? And so I think trying to take a really citizen, people-centric view of the technology is so important, because otherwise, yeah, we can get swept up with the Ubers of the world, trying to connect everything up in the background and lose sight, I guess, of the why. Like, why is this good for cities? Why is this good for people? Why is this good for decarbonisation and net zero and all those good things? Yeah. Martin?
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge is local implementations without any vision. We will end up with a lot of schemes that will work very well on a local basis. And don't get me wrong, there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all mobility as a service solution. We have to take account of local needs, local geographies, local economic situations, and what the population and the people need. But without a vision, we're going to end up with exactly the same problem we've heard described already. You said it earlier, Daz. You get off the bus, or off the train. Where do I get the taxi? How do I pay for it? Do they take contactless here? We can break that down if we want to. None of this is a technical problem. This is purely down to communication, policy, will, and overcoming commercial objections. Open payment is going to make it easier. You know, I'm not going to go on about payments a lot, even though I'm from a payments company. But payment is critical here, because the easier you make it for people to pay and the easier you make it to settle the payments that are due to the operators, the more the operator resistance breaks down and the more attractive it becomes for people to use it. And whatever happens, to be successful, mass has to have volume, has to have people coming through it on a regular and in large numbers. And that's where a government vision comes in. There needs to be government money behind making this an attractive idea. I'm not saying we've got to subsidise everybody, but there does need to be more seed funding. But we have to have a government vision to make the idea of getting out of your car and using integrated shared transport a real possibility for people that they want to do. Without that, it's going to be so sporadic, and all the effort will be fragmented.
Yeah, I agree. I think it came back to the sort of question I asked earlier about the sort of vision for Holland and those sorts of things as well, because it's how does Mars fit into the fabric of all that? And my personal question that I've asked of the DFT several times, and my personal concern is people don't live in one small geographical area. So we might do Mars for the West Midlands, but there's a very transient area. So Mars might work for some of their journeys, but not all. And so actually its value and power is quite diminished quite quickly. So, and if we've got several different Mars deployments, actually what you've done is created the same problem you've got on a micro level at a slightly larger level. So I suppose that leads nicely onto the sort of final question I have, which is sort of the future of mobility as a service, and sort of hypothesizing and dreaming aside, what do you think is the role of Mars going forward, and equally, how far should Mars, as we've dreamt it around a technology transport solution, go? Because integration, as we've talked about, it can go as far as we want. Actually, do we think Mars is the mechanism to sort of manage a wider piece like they do with in China? They've got obviously the app that controls everything, Alipay, for example. So do we see Mars as that, or do we see Mars as actually transport focused going forward?
Me? You sure?
Go for
You
it.
spoke before I did.
Well, might regret that. I think it's an opportunity for MAS to go a little bit wider. MAS, for me, is still in its sort of phase one, which is very much about the nuts and bolts. It's still about the planning and payment and kind of ticketing part of it. And then there's all sorts of challenges there that we've just mentioned, commercial agreements and all the rest of it. That's fine. But actually, when MAS was first coined, going back 10, 15, 20 years ago now, actually one of the main drivers of it was this thing of personalisation. That's what was really driving it. And personalisation in a mass transit forum might sound a little bit odd, but personalisation of choice, building the apps to provide that personalised service, building the transport choices around your needs and desires, but then also using that as a way to reward and incentivise behaviour. That's something that MAS has always been talked about within MAS, but we're only just scraping the surface of it now. We have I should have mentioned this, there are 5 projects currently running in Scotland as part of the Scottish Government's MAS Investment Fund. One of those is now beginning to look at reward and incentivisation scheme, and there are a few examples of that, but there are not much. And again, if we want to begin to elicit the modal shift that we desire, we're going to have to start tapping into that. We're going to have to start using the carrot alongside the stick. We're going to have to start rewarding the types of behaviours that we want. And the only way to do that is to partner transport with other areas of people's lives. And it could be very simple things like they like coffee, or they like going to the cinema, or they like whatever. I mean, you can be as innovative as you like as to how you run these reward and incentivisation schemes. But I think getting to the user at an individual level will be a really important way of doing it. We're not there yet. I'm not suggesting that we are there yet. We need to get the nuts and bolts right first. But for me, that's the evolution in the second phase of MAS.
And it's interesting. I think you mentioned earlier about like that personalised experience. And the change in getting, I guess, younger people onto using public transport, because there is a massive expectation among like millennials, Gen Z, Alpha, to have these personalised experiences and to understand, or to have the feeling that whatever they're seeing on their phone, whatever is happening, is really contoured to them and to their experience. And so I think that having, that one-stop shop could really be a thing that that does that, and that would be really interesting. But I think, that is really that is really hard, obviously, and trying to get that connection of all those systems, that connection of all that data is obviously, I think a massive challenge that's holding us back at the moment.
I mean, users are very demanding and becoming more demanding for systems that are just usable, and I think that's, we need to make something that is almost compulsive, not compulsory, but is compulsive to use. And one example issue we have at the moment is the requirement for driver license verification for use of e-scooters, for example. Every time you go to a new city or a new provider, you have to reassert your driving license. And even in the MAS systems we're involved with, where there's another MAS service, another owner, if you like, they require a different driving license. So the poor customer might have to do it, several times. And so there are privacy issues, but be able to, share and create, and I've been an example of, multiple apps now that you download and just say, use Google to identify me, use my Google or use my Facebook, bang, it's done. So we need to get to that sort of point in terms of how we're working together. Otherwise, I think we'll lose people along the way.
Yeah, you want it to be the real reflexive choice, right? Like you go somewhere, you want to do something, you reach for your phone,
Just
you plan
automatic,
this
it
app.
just happens.
Yeah, because I think at the moment, a lot of the time, that easy option is hopping in the car. And so, yeah, I think you talk about the future look, I think that future is, your first instinct is to reach for that Mars solution, however it looks for you in your journey.
I think most of this has been said, but I think that we can take the personalisation aspect of this even further, in that if we're able somehow in some universe to get away from the total paranoia about how our data is used and allow people to actually give permission for their data to be used for their own benefit, which will not then be abused, we could start providing services that are run directly according to what people want and need, what they've said their preferences are, but also starting to predict the types of journeys they're going to want to take and offer them incentives to do that so as to avoid congestion, to avoid trouble spots, to avoid accidents. All of that is entirely possible, and it's in use in retail all the time. But we aren't doing it in transport because transport is fragmented. So we need to, that's what it comes back to the vision point again. And with that data, we can also plan our services so much better than we are at the moment. Take the example of the railways. You know, the services are planned on massively historical data. They're not planned on real world needs of people, and they're not planned on where people are travelling from and to, only which stations they're getting on and off at. All of that could be changed if we change our attitude to data.
Brilliant. I think there's some really interesting reflections within that, and also for myself. Conscious we've got 10 minutes left. Is there any questions from the audience? Okay. Yeah, spark some debate. Not sure it's on, but...
Okay. To what extent do these proposed solutions you're talking about promote healthy outcomes that have no margin, such as walking between places that people think they want to get a taxi between?
Good question.
Hello, Miranda. That comes down to people being able to express their preferences and what they're willing to do in terms of not always looking for a single mode, being able to say, I'm willing to walk at least a mile because I want to get my steps in. It again comes back to being focused on the person rather than the process and the system. What does the person want? Let's design the system and the processes around them.
I think you can pull that back to the governance and the leadership as well, because if you have a response that's being led by, or a system being led by a single entity, if it's a commercial entity, they might bias towards the mode that they specialise in, and that's a commercial decision that they would make. And do we want that to be a commercial decision? Because it's not necessarily the best decision for us as people, or as our communities or our cities. So yeah.
I can't really add more to that. Exactly the same thing. That's in our opinion, that's why the public sector should really be the lead on this, for exactly that reason. Partnering, of course, with those that can provide the expertise where it's needed from the private sector, but it needs to be led by the public.
I had to make this sort of comment earlier about the conscience, because I think this plays quite a significant part in how we set this up, and actually what quantifies success in Mars as well. I think we ultimately, as a local authority or combined authority, we want to drive a level of sustainable behaviour. That also includes people not taking the trip as well. And I think that's a sort of key component of this. So it's about, again, giving the people the right information at the right time to make that informed choice that's right for them.
And to improve, I should add, safety, particularly of women and children on transport. If you can identify where they are in their journey, because they've given up their data for that specific purpose, they're going to be an awful lot safer than they are at the moment, where all the data is either siloed or doesn't exist.
It was well, two questions there. There's one behind you, Rukshan, that went up. Okay, this lady here, sorry, has got the microphone, in fact. There we go.
Hi, Sue Upenshaw from Jacobs. Wonderful feeling of this app, the utopia of being able to go on there and find out where you want to go and get there. But we've got a major problem with our current services at the moment. They're not reliable. you could have every app under your sun, but you can turn up to a station and your train's been cancelled. You're not going to get public on public transport by doing that.
Yeah, that's where our focus is as Snapper. Like, that's what we're trying to work with authorities to, also we are working with authorities to do now, is understand actually what is happening in that network. Because yeah, like you say, if I show up for a bus that never appears, I might never come back. I might be like, well, actually, I really needed to get to work today, so I actually can't wait for a bus that's never going to show up. And so, yeah, that punctuality, that reliability, that real-time information that informs accurate journey planning is such a foundational, fundamental element of making these big, broad systems work, and trying to get those sort of ABCs of good public transport together is, yeah, something that we still need to work on, I think.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, you
No, I think trust is a big part of that. So giving people the full information. So I think that's where it's really important that, a chain's as strong as its weakest link, right? So, if part of your journey can't be fulfilled, as a user, you want to know about that as early as possible and have suggested changes or make your own alternatives, not just find out that something's gone wrong. So, nothing is perfect in the world, but that's about, right, accurate, timely information provision. But I don't think there's very much four of us can do about train timetables.
I suppose the only thing I'd maybe to add to this, I suppose what Mars has done for us is shine a light on the fact that we as a business, as an industry, are not as customer focused as we probably need to be. And that means actually focusing on what customers require, whether that be the requirements, individual requirements, but actually more around just delivering the hygiene factors around customer experience, making sure that when the bus is scheduled to arrive, it arrives. And I think we talk about this sort of trifactor within Mars. You've got the app, you've got the underpinning services, and then you've got the behaviour you want as well. And actually, if one of those falls over, the whole thing falls apart. So actually the concept of Mars is wholly dependent on being able to achieve those underlying services robustly as well.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm not suggesting this was necessarily the sentiment of the question, but I think almost I've heard that the state of the underlying services is almost a reason not to be doing mass. And I would say, well, I'm not sure that it is. Yes, it can't do anything about reliability and safety and cleanliness of services, but it doesn't diminish the value in having that digital access point for those who are engaging with it, and for encouraging more to do so. So yeah, it's just one tool in the toolkit, but I still think that's something, it's still an important one that we have to invest in.
There's a gentleman with the microphone at the back.
Sorry. John Davis, Via Plus. Just looking internationally, and all the different countries are looking at Mars, there seems to be a move towards a setup where the public sector should just ensure they control the data, centralized data, and then you let the private sector, to your point, provide all the CX services, and like they're the experts in identifying what their respective customers need. So is that a sort of model you think that the UK would transition to, or should the public sector be more involved in defining the services or how the services are used?
If I could go.
Yeah, absolutely.
You wonder what drives that kind of division and that division of responsibility. And I think part of the reason is what I referred to earlier, the paranoia that if you leave the private sector to control the data, then it will get out of control. It'll be abused. I'm taken back, actually, very quickly. A few years ago, I used to work for Cubic, and we introduced the Oyster card in London. They needed to do something similar in New York, and they thought, okay, let's have a smart card. And they put this out as a consultation on Facebook. First comment that came back, no smart cards, just another way for the government to track you. There was a pause for about 5 minutes, and then someone came back with, Carlos, hate to tell you this, nobody cares where you're going. And what's more, I can check on Facebook and see exactly when you're going to be out, when your home's empty and where all your children are, and you're worried about security? I think that's the concern that people have about their data being abused. It doesn't really, I think as long as you can guarantee that the data that is being used, that is being gathered, is being used for the benefit of the individual who generated it, and you could argue that the data belongs to that person. It doesn't belong to the person who's harvested it. Then we should be able to have the option of that data being used by both private and public sector, but it has to be done on the basis of trust, absolute cast iron trust.
Any other reflections?
No, just that I agree. We talk about this trusted broker model, and and that can be personal data, but also the various operator data and siloed data. And again, this gets back to the public sector, local authority, transport authority, whatever it is, being the obvious choice of that rather than a private entity.
And I think the why are we doing it as well? Like if you're using data in specific ways, why? Is it for the good of the user? Is it for the good of the network? Being able to really keep those people, those human beings in focus, I think is really key to doing it right.
I think we've got time for one more question. I think the gentleman with the microphone is waiting patiently.
Still on the microphone, so I think I stole on the last question. The car industry has some exceptional lobbyists, and so when I hear the vision of mass, they very quickly spin that into self-driving electric cars as the true answer. It's safe, secure, CO2 negative or neutral. How do we fight back as providers of public transport or interested people in the public transport system when they've got this big trove of money and kind of this vision for mass? What is our sort of 1-2 sentences when we sit down with those influential power players and say, no, don't send 10 billion euros across to self-driving cars, don't send it in this way, send it to this new mass system that's really going to have the true value?
I think partly, okay, shall I go first?
Yeah, of course.
Partly, I think EV sales, for example, are levelling out now. And whilst the EVs are the price they're out of the reach for most people. So we have to, therefore, if we are going to get to a point where EV sales drop, EV prices drop sufficiently, it becomes a mass market option, then we're going to have to look at how do we regulate how many cars are coming into cities or into regions, and is there a way in which regulation could make public transport more attractive simply because it's less expensive to do it that way. I also think there's one other thing, very briefly. Okay. We just published a white paper a couple of months ago advocating free public transport for all under 18s, create an entire generation who want to use public transport, for whom the idea of owning a car, their own car, is alien. My 2 kids don't have any aspiration to own a car. One lives in London, one lives in Hampshire. Don't want to own a car. Build on that. Get people, young people, using public transport as a habit.
Yeah, I think one thing that the EV, self-driving vehicle thing can't do is that inclusivity that public transport can do on that mass scale. People that have different disabilities, they are able to jump on a bus, they're able to jump on a train. That might not be as possible necessarily in a private vehicle, no matter how it's being operated. You might still run into issues with traffic. You can't, send 7-year-old Timmy in a self-driving car off to school in the morning, but you can chuck Timmy on a bus and he'll get there all good. And so I think there's a portion of our communities that we leave behind if we focus on those solutions. Yeah.
And I think on the autonomous vehicle, that's a complete game changer, of course, and I'm not going to predict when exactly that will come in, but it's difficult to imagine an ownership model for autonomous vehicles when they begin to come in. So in many ways, platforms like Mobility as a Service become more important. And those that are running these fleets will also welcome that, because they'll make more efficient use of the pods, or the vehicles, whatever we want to call them, are when they were there. Now, we're projecting a lot into the future at the moment, but for me, it's going to become even more of a service model at that point, because autonomous vehicles are going to be too expensive for the vast majority of the public, you would assume, at least for quite a period of time. So I think, if anything, that could drive it. Pardon the pun.
Yeah, I think in the urban environment, obviously EVs, self-driving cars, or they help with the emissions issues and decarbonisation, etc. But they don't help with the use of space, etc. Was it a third of all space in cities is given to parking or driving a car, etc. So moving towards other forms of mass transport that release that space, make it greener, make it better places for us to live and work in, I think, is the argument that goes towards public transport and away from even shared vehicles, when in the future, when you call it your own self-driving car. and that may happen.
I think well, I suppose my only reflection on this, having worked in the motor trade for 10 years, the car is here to stay. So we're not going to be in an environment where the car is not here. There is a place whereby actually the car is very useful for a lot of people that would also be using MAS. I think where there's a real power is if we can integrate MAS and also as part of that have a proportional amount of car use within that. Actually, you're giving that informed choice for people to make those informed decisions. I think there's a balance here where it's not car industry versus public transport. There's a space where actually we need to try and work collectively to create an environment that everyone wants to live and everyone can actually pick the right mode at the right time. I suppose on that note, I just want to say a big thank you because Max will be telling me I'm out of time. So I think a round of applause for the panelists. That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
you.